This episode shares the story of a lady who said to her brother-in-law in front of her in-laws, "Did you receive such a poor upbringing? Now, what could have happened? Let's find out together." Please subscribe and like our channel.
Hello? The economy isn't doing well, and the cost of living keeps rising, making things tough for everyone, right? We're both working, but raising 2 kids is still a struggle. Let's all hang in there. After marrying my husband, we lived with my in-laws for a year. It was less like we were taking care of them, and more like we were freeloading at their house. They suggested we live together. They said we could save money and move out whenever we wanted. Before marriage, my mother-in-law was easygoing, but after we started living together, she showed her true colors. She had told me before marriage, "Get married, save money, and move out. I'll do most of the household chores since you have a job." But this promise was not kept at all. My husband and I don't eat breakfast and go to work. When I got home from work, there were dishes from lunch and dinner in the sink. After eating dinner with my husband, I washed the dishes. Naturally, I ended up doing all the housework. I was cherished at my parents' house until marriage. I had hardly done any housework. When my husband tried to help with housework, my in-laws fiercely objected. They couldn't stand the sight of their son doing housework. Anyway, I was living at my in-laws' house, so I just did the dirty and humble chores. It was hard to naturally do all the housework and even listen to nagging. Before marriage, my mother-in-law always called my parents in-laws. But after marriage, she immediately changed. She changed the title to your mom and your dad. I should have pointed this out to her from the beginning. My mother-in-law started it, and my father-in-law followed. Later, my brother-in-law also followed, and I couldn't stand it. My parents and my brother's family go on a 2-day trip once a month. My parents almost always cover the travel expenses. Before marriage, I didn't go on family trips, because I wanted to rest on weekends. But after marriage, I wanted to go. I think I wanted to get away from my in-laws, even for a while. At first, my in-laws didn't say anything about traveling with my parents. After going on a trip with my family twice, they told me not to go. My mother-in-law said that if I got married, I shouldn't be close to my parents, but my mother-in-law isn't old enough to have such a mindset. She's in her early 60s now. So back then, she was in her 50s. She said, "Why does your dad waste money like that? Does your mom really want to travel that much?" She told me not to go, speaking as if she were belittling my parents. At first, my mother-in-law must have thought we were also paying for the trip. She complained about traveling with my parents without thinking about saving money. So I told her that my parents almost entirely cover the travel expenses. But she made an excuse saying, "If you get married, you shouldn't be close with your parents." What made me angrier than my mother-in-law's complaints was her referring to my parents as your dad and your mom. She talked as if she had suffered a lot after marrying my father-in-law. At first, I thought maybe she had a difficult past, but the more I thought about it, there was nothing in my mother-in-law's life that would suggest she had struggled. She didn't have to live with her in-laws after her marriage, and aside from briefly working, she has been a stay-at-home mom. Yet, she always complained about aches and pains, acting as if she was on death's door. Living with such a person was incredibly stressful. Life with my in-laws became so hard that I kept asking my husband to move out as soon as possible. He agreed, and we secretly started looking into getting a loan. After a few months of preparation, we moved out less than a year after our wedding. We prepared for the move and only told my in-laws a few days before. We purposely told them late, because we thought they would interfere if they knew beforehand. As expected, my mother-in-law created a scene when we told them we were moving out. She was upset that we had looked for a house and prepared for our new life without consulting her. She said making such decisions without her input was disrespectful and ignoring her as a parent. She warned us that nothing would go well for us if we continued to act so rudely, and that our children would also suffer. I wondered if she wanted to curse even her own grandchildren. My husband couldn't stand it anymore and retorted, asking why she would say such things when she wouldn't have helped, even if we had told her earlier. Then, even my father-in-law stepped in, raising his voice at my husband for talking back to his mother. Anyway, it was a tough move. On the day of our move, my mother-in-law came over and threw a tantrum. I was so annoyed that I quietly told my husband to send her away. He did, and she left, wailing loudly that her only son was ignoring his parents. It seemed like she was crying out for everyone to hear, including the movers and our new neighbors. After we started living separately, I only went to my in-laws' house on holidays. I only called my mother-in-law when necessary, and only my husband went when there was a family event at their house. At first, my mother-in-law would call and stress me out, so I stopped answering her calls. Then I guess she started badmouthing me to my sister-in-law? My sister-in-law called me and said something about it. When I lived with my in-laws and when I moved out, it was always the same. I explained it to my sister-in-law, but she talked as if I was making excuses with lies. So, I stopped answering her calls too. After keeping my distance from my in-laws for several years, they started treating me more cautiously. I guess my mother-in-law's bad temper didn't disappear. She probably was careful not to upset me in case I wouldn't even come on holidays. Feeling a bit more comfortable than before, I started visiting my in-laws on anniversaries and family events in addition to holidays. At first, she seemed grateful, but then my mother-in-law started showing her true colors again. She was careful in front of me, but I guess she kept badmouthing me to my sister-in-law. My sister-in-law lives far from my in-laws, but somehow she always seemed to be speaking for my mother-in-law. Recently, on Parents' Day, my sister-in-law came over for some reason. Seeing her come alone, I wondered if she had a fight with her husband and came by herself. After dining out together, I gave my in-laws some spending money for the first time in a long while. Seeing my mother-in-law act up after so long, she asked, "Do you give money to your parents too?" I was upset, but I replied, "No, we treat both families equally." Suddenly, my sister-in-law said, "Aren't you the one managing the money? Are you secretly sending money to your mom?" I found myself raising my voice. "Could you please stop talking about your mom, your dad? I don't know if you're showing off that you never learned how to speak properly." She was taken aback, exclaiming, "Look at her, yelling, where her parents-in-law are present." I retorted, "You're disrespecting my parents in front of everyone. Should I just stand by?" She looked baffled and sighed, to which I asked, "Did you learn to act this way from your mother?" She yelled, "Do you even realize what you're saying?" I shot back, "I'm asking if you received such a poor upbringing from your parents. Who else in the world would be so rude as to refer to their in-laws as your mom, your dad in front of everyone?" I suggested to my father-in-law that he use this opportunity to correct my sister-in-law's bad habit. The other customers in the restaurant started murmuring and looking at us. So my in-laws didn't say anything, perhaps out of self-consciousness. I said a few more things to my sister-in-law, asking if she learned to behave this way from her mother. Seeing my in-laws and sister-in-law unable to respond and boiling inside, I felt somewhat satisfied. The next day, I received a call from my mother-in-law. I was surprised when she tried to soothe me instead of getting angry, asking me why I had raised my voice in a crowded place. Anyway, I said, my sister-in-law is showing off that she was poorly raised. How uncouth is it for her to refer to my parents as your mom to me? She rushed to say that anyone could make such a mistake when speaking hastily. I got angry again and said, no. It seems like your daughter is taking after you in speaking rudely. She had nothing to say. I told her I would hang up if she had nothing more to say and ended the call. I felt a bit relieved after that. I think the family of my husband's has given up on me. I try to think of them as people who have nothing to do with me. There's no chance that my sister-in-law, who refers to my parents as your mom, and my mother-in-law, who thinks that it's understandable to say such a thing when speaking hastily, will ever become normal. Thank you for listening to my story.
She did well. People who don't realize their wrongdoings often can't handle being spoken to harshly or being ignored. How deficient must a person be not to realize their own mistakes? If she had pointed it out nicely, they probably would have pretended not to understand or changed the subject. It seems that her in-laws are the type of people who only understand their mistakes when they are pointed out bluntly.